Okay, so get this right. 3 former students in Malaysia, they just won this lawsuit against their teacher
Wow.
for not showing up, right, to class for 7 months.
Oh, wow.
It sounds crazy, doesn't it? It's kind of wild. But it got me thinking, this actually leads into some really interesting stuff about teacher ethics in Malaysia.
Yeah, yeah.
And what's so cool about these sources that you gave me is that we're not just like looking at dry rules.
Right.
We've got these official documents, news articles, even
Yeah.
a student presentation on teacher ethics.
Oh, cool.
So we're getting all these different perspectives, which I always find super interesting.
Yeah, it's like we're getting this 360-degree view
Exactly.
of what it means to be a teacher in Malaysia, like what values are emphasized and how these ethical principles actually like play out,
Exactly.
in real life situations.
As in real life.
Yeah.
So let's start with the student presentation. It's called Etika Profession Keguruan. It's pretty amazing that even students are thinking about this stuff.
Yeah. It really speaks to how deeply ingrained these ethical concepts are in Malaysian society. They're not just like these abstract rules, they're part of the fabric of education.
Yeah, and speaking of fabric, the students actually quote this dictionary,
Right.
the Kamastuan DC Kimpet, to define etika as principles, morals, and values that guide behavior.
Yeah.
So it's like a moral compass, right?
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They connect this definition back to lawsuits, right?
Right. Yeah.
They're arguing that the teacher's actions, or rather inaction,
Yeah.
directly contradicted these ethical principles.
That's a really great observation.
Yeah.
It highlights how these ethical principles aren't just theoretical. They have real world consequences. And this idea of a moral compass,
Right.
it actually aligns perfectly with the Falsafa Pendidikan Guru, or FPG, which outlines like the ideal Malaysian teacher.
Okay, so tell me about this FTG.
Yeah.
What kind of picture does it paint of a teacher?
It's actually, it's quite poetic. It describes a Malaysian teacher as noble, progressive, someone who embodies both national aspirations and cultural heritage. Now imagine like trying to live up to that ideal.
Oh, yeah.
It's a tall order.
That's a lot.
It's especially, when faced with the everyday realities of a classroom, which brings us back to that lawsuit and the complexities that teachers face.
So they're expected to be like guardians of tradition and agents of progress all at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a powerful image. But let's get into the nitty-gritty, like how these ideals translate into actual rules and regulations. We've got several key documents to explore, starting with the Kodadeka Kerja KPM. This document focuses on promoting positive values within the Malaysian civil service, which,
Includes
teachers.
Right,
it emphasizes honesty, dedication, compassion, and constantly striving for improvement.
Yeah.
It's interesting how these principles resonate with the students' point about teachers being anggera ke arah kebaikan and memperkatakan apa yang dikatakan. Meaning, there should be drivers of good and practice what they preach.
Right. So it's like they're saying teachers should be role models.
Yeah.
Not just like with their words, but in their actions.
Exactly.
And that lack of action in the lawsuit really seems to have struck a nerve.
Yeah.
So tell me, what happens when a teacher's actions, or lack thereof, don't align with these principles? What are the consequences?
Well, that's where the Peraturan Penjawat Awam Tingkah Laku dan Tata Tertib 1993, Pindan 2002 comes in.
Okay.
This document outlines what constitutes unacceptable behavior. Right.
For civil servants, including teachers, of course.
Yeah.
It covers a wide range of offenses, from engaging in criminal activities to, wait for it,
Okay.
wearing inappropriate attire to work.
Hold on. Inappropriate attire.
Yeah.
What does that even, like, in the context of Malaysian schools?
It's quite specific.
Okay.
The document mentions sarongs and slippers as examples of clothing that are deemed inappropriate for teachers. It really makes you think about how cultural context shapes these ethical codes and how they might differ from other countries.
I'm immediately thinking about, like, all the history and the societal reasons behind that rule,
Yeah. Absolutely.
It feels like there's a whole nother deep dive waiting to happen there.
Right.
But
and this brings us to the Ikrar Guru,
okay,
the teacher's oath, which is like this powerful declaration of their commitment to their students, to society, and to the nation. And I actually I asked you earlier about teachers in your country, right?
Yeah.
Do they take a similar oath? Are there parallels in other education systems?
You know, that's a great question, and it speaks to a larger point. Well, you know, every country has its own like cultural nuances.
Right.
The core values embedded in the Ikrar Guru, you know, like integrity, responsibility, and a dedication to student well-being.
Yeah.
You know, these are likely to resonate with educators worldwide.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the universal nature of some ethical principles.
Right. That makes sense. So we've got this overarching oath, but then there's also a document like specifically dedicated to the ethical code, right, for Malaysian teachers.
Exactly. The Code Etika Profession Keguru in Malaysia.
Okay.
This code really gets to the heart of what it means to be a teacher in Malaysia. And one of the most striking statements it makes is that a teacher's primary responsibility is to their students. Like, their well-being comes before anything else.
Wow.
Even the interests of, you know, professional organizations. It's a bold statement that puts students front and center.
Which, thinking back to that lawsuit, makes the teacher's absence even more perplexing.
Yeah, exactly.
If their primary responsibility was to those students, how could they justify, you know, like being absent for so long?
It's a question that underscores the tension between the ideal and the reality of teaching. And this code goes even further, emphasizing the role of teachers as pengganti ibu bapa, substitute parents.
So it's not just about, like, you know, teaching the subject matter. It's about nurturing, guiding these students, almost like a parental figure.
Exactly.
It really makes you wonder, like, what kind of impact that teacher's absence had on those students.
Yeah.
Not just, you know, academically, but emotionally as well.
That's a really important point. It speaks to the profound influence that teachers have on their students' lives.
Right.
And the deep sense of responsibility that comes with that role. And it brings us to a crucial question.
Yeah.
How can we ensure that teachers are like equipped, you know, to navigate the complex ethical landscape of the classroom?
That's a great question.
And uphold these high standards.
And thankfully, the student presentation actually offers some insights into how to bridge the gap between these principles and real-world practice.
Yeah.
But we'll save that discussion for part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good. So welcome back to our deep dive into teacher ethics in Malaysia.
Yeah, before the break, we were talking about, like, the weight of all this responsibility placed on teachers, you know, and how challenging it must be to like live up to those expectations in a real classroom, you know.
Absolutely.
And it got me thinking about that student presentation we touched on. They outlined these, I think it was Lanka or steps for putting those ethical codes into practice.
Right.
It wasn't just like theoretical, you know. They actually had like practical solutions.
Yeah, and what's so valuable about their perspective is that, you know, it's coming from those who are directly impacted by these codes, the students themselves.
Exactly.
You know, they have like unique insight into what works, what doesn't in the classroom.
Yeah, so let's break down some of these Lanka.
Okay.
One that that stood out to me was Penglebatan community involvement.
Community involvement, yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, so this step emphasizes the importance of involving the entire school community in shaping those ethical codes. So think about like parents, students, even the wider community coming together to discuss those ethical dilemmas, share perspectives, co-create solutions, you know?
It's like a collaborative approach to ethics, right?
So exactly.
Where everybody has like a voice and a stake in upholding these values.
Precisely. And I can see how this kind of, you know, collaborative approach could have been really helpful in the case of the lawsuit, you know? Imagine if there were like open channels of communication between the teacher, the students, the parents. You know, perhaps the situation could have been addressed before it escalated to such a degree.
It's like creating a safety net, right?
Yeah.
Where like concerns can be raised and addressed
Absolutely.
early on.
Early on. Yeah.
And it creates this sense of like shared responsibility,
Yeah.
which could make these ethical codes feel less like abstract rules and more like a living, breathing part of the school culture.
Absolutely. And this idea of a living, breathing code, ties directly into another langka-langka, penilean dan penambabaikan beturisam, continuous evaluation and improvement.
So these ethical codes aren't like set in stone.
Right.
They're constantly evolving to reflect new challenges, new realities.
Exactly.
But how does that actually work, like in practice?
It requires a proactive approach.
Right.
Schools need to have systems in place for gathering feedback from teachers, from students, from parents, even experts in the field.
Right.
This feedback helps to identify potential ethical gray areas, and it allows the code to adapt accordingly.
So it's like an ethical early warning system, right?
I like that analogy.
Constantly scanning the horizon for like potential issues before they like blow up into big problems.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of being proactive rather than reactive.
Right.
And it also speaks to the need for professional development for teachers.
Yeah.
They need to be equipped with the knowledge, the skills to make ethically sound decisions, especially as, technology and social norms are rapidly evolving.
It's like we're asking teachers to be like guardians of tradition.
Yeah.
But also pioneers of the future.
Right.
All while navigating this like constantly shifting ethical landscape.
It's a tall order, which is why the student presentation also emphasizes kesadaran dan pendidikan etika, awareness and education around ethics. It's not just about memorizing rules, it's about developing those critical thinking skills to handle those, nuanced situations where there's no easy answer.
So ethics class for teachers.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah, it's like giving them a mental toolkit to grapple with the complexities of ethical decision making in the classroom.
Exactly.
Equip them with the tools and then provide the support.
Right.
The students also mentioned sokongan dan pengawasan berterusan.
Okay.
Ongoing support and supervision.
Which means
creating a culture where teachers feel comfortable seeking guidance, seeking support.
Yeah.
When they're faced with an ethical dilemma, maybe there are like designated ethics mentors or committees they can turn to, for advice or simply to discuss a challenging situation.
Yeah, it takes away that pressure of feeling like they have to like figure everything out on their own.
Exactly.
And it fosters that sense of community, right? Around these ethical issues.
Yeah. And remember, even with all the guidelines and support systems in place, ethical decision-making isn't always, black and white.
Oh, yeah.
There will be gray areas, situations where teachers have to weigh competing values and make judgment calls.
And that's why this focus on like critical thinking and ongoing support is so crucial.
Absolutely.
But I'm also curious about how cultural context, plays into all of this. We talked about that rule against teachers wearing sarongs and slippers to school.
Right.
And it got me thinking about how, Malaysian culture might influence the understanding of teacher ethics more broadly,
That's a great point. And it leads us into like an even deeper layer of this conversation.
We're back, and before the break, we were talking about how something as simple as like a dress code can reflect like duper cultural values.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested to see how those values actually shape the broader understanding of teacher ethics in Malaysia.
Yeah, it's fascinating how culture kind of permeates every aspect of life, including, how we perceive, how we approach ethical issues.
Yeah.
And in Malaysia, where, respect for tradition, respect for authority are so deeply ingrained, those cultural influences are particularly pronounced in the education system.
So tell me, how do those cultural values actually play out? Like specifically in the context of teacher ethics?
Well, think about like the concept of guru in Malaysian culture.
Okay.
It's not just a profession. It's
Right.
like a revered role that carries a lot of weight in society. Teachers are seen as mentors, as guides.
Yeah.
Almost like surrogate parents, as we discussed earlier.
Right. That pengganti ibu bapa idea.
Exactly.
Like they're entrusted with shaping not just, the minds of their students, but also their character.
Exactly. And with that, like, elevated position comes a heightened sense of responsibility and accountability.
Right, yeah.
Teachers are expected to embody certain, moral virtues, uphold the values of Malaysian society, both within and outside of the classroom.
Right.
Their actions reflect not just on themselves, but on the entire teaching profession. Yeah,
it's like they're carrying the torch for these cultural values and passing them on to the next generation.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this ties into another key aspect of Malaysian culture.
Right.
The emphasis on respect for authority.
Yeah.
Students are expected to show deference to their teachers.
Yeah.
And teachers in turn are expected to conduct themselves in a way that warrants that respect.
So there's a strong sense of like hierarchy and decorum. Right.
Exactly.
In the teacher-student relationship.
Yeah, it's all about maintaining that respectful distance.
Right, but I have to wonder, does this cultural context ever create like challenges or even conflicts when it comes to ethical decision-making for teachers?
That's a really insightful question.
What happens when those traditional values like bump up against modern ideas or even like universal ethical principles?
It's something that, educators around the world grapple with, right? As societies evolve and global perspectives shift.
Yeah.
For example, consider the issue of corporal punishment.
Oh, yeah.
In some cultures, including Malaysia, there's a long-standing tradition of, using physical discipline as a means of correction.
Right. I remember hearing that phrase, spare the rod, spoil the child, growing up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in recent years, there's been a growing recognition that corporal punishment can actually be harmful and violates children's rights.
Right.
So this has led to like a push for its abolition in schools, which creates this clash, right, between a traditional practice and evolving ethical norms.
So the teachers are like caught in the middle.
Right.
They might have grown up with corporal punishment as like the norm, but now they're being asked to adopt a different approach that aligns with international standards of child protection.
Yeah.
That's a tough position to be in.
It is, and it highlights the importance of having these open conversations, and providing teachers with the support, the guidance they need to navigate these complex ethical dilemmas.
It's like what those students were saying in their presentation, right? About ongoing evaluation and professional development.
Right.
It's about like constantly adapting, right, to these new understandings.
Yeah.
And ensuring that those ethical codes reflect the evolving needs of society.
Absolutely. And it requires a delicate balance. It's not about blindly adopting external models, but about critically evaluating them and adapting them to the Malaysian context.
So finding that sweet spot where we uphold like those universal ethical principles, but also like respect and preserve the cultural values that make the Malaysian education system unique.
Exactly. And I think the langkah-langkah the students outlined, provide a fantastic roadmap for achieving that balance.
Yeah.
Remember their emphasis on community involvement, continuous evaluation, ongoing support.
Yeah.
These steps ensure that ethical codes are not static. That they evolve to meet the needs of both the present and the future.
It's like they're saying that ethical codes should be like living documents, constantly being shaped and reshaped through dialogue and feedback and critical reflection.
Well said. And that's ultimately what makes this deep dive into teacher ethics so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing rules, but about engaging in this ongoing conversation about what it means to be an ethical educator in a complex
and ever-changing world.
This has been such an insightful journey.
It has.
We've explored the rules, the ideals, the challenges,
Yeah.
even the cultural nuances
Right.
that shape this crucial profession.
Absolutely.
But more importantly,
Yeah.
we've highlighted the need for this open dialogue, this reflection, and this adaptation to ensure that those ethical standards remain relevant and effective.
Well, and perhaps, dear listener, this has prompted some reflection of your own. What are the ethical expectations for teachers in your community? How do cultural values influence those expectations? And what steps can we take, collectively to ensure that our educators are equipped to navigate the ethical challenges of the 21st century?
Yeah.
These are questions worth pondering, as we continue to shape the future of education. And on that note, we wrap up our deep dive into teacher ethics in Malaysia.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
Keep thinking.
And those ethical compasses pointed in the right direction.
Absolutely.